Hi, everybody. This is Hondo Carpenter from Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. Great to have you back with us on this Friday afternoon. And wherever you are, if you're watching over the weekend or whenever you're watching, it's just great to have you. Thank you for participating and being part of this. We always love to check in with Johnny. As you guys know, I've already done 2 podcasts on the top 10 candidates to be the Raiders coaches. And so we're not going to really get into that in this podcast. In this podcast, we're going to talk about all that went on around the Raiders. We're going to talk about all of it. We're going to reflect on the trade deadline. We're going to touch on what's going on at the University of Michigan. Got some inside information there that I think may be interesting for some of you. And then we're going to take a brief second and I'm going to share a story about a man that really impacted my life and impacted a lot of others, and that's the great Bobby Knight. So to have this conversation, like we always do again, thank you for watching the Sports Illustrated Fan Nation Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. We are growing unbelievably fast. Literally, I think somewhere around 250,000 of you have caught our podcast in the last 28 days. Thank you so much. If I'm off on that figure, I'm not lying, but I think that's pretty accurate. I think it's like 539,000. Thank you guys for subscribing, following, doing whatever you do. We appreciate it. All of our content's free. The other day, I think we had 18 pieces of content. Remember, don't pay other people for what we give you for free. So thanks for being with us, Johnny. The Raiders, let's dig right in. You and I obviously talk off the record. I had shared with you all along about why I said it was only a 5% chance Josh McDaniels was going to be fired. They were assured after the Patriots win that they were going to be back in 24. It was exactly what they were told. I don't believe Mark Davis lied. I'm not implying that in the least bit. I think anything far from it. But it just got so bad that something had to happen. Now, Mark Davis, and I was sharing this with you because my job's not to create news. And I can easily tell the people, oh, the locker room's upset. But the problem was, and I shared that. I shared that publicly. They were frustrated, but they hadn't turned on Josh McDaniels. When Mark Davis would talk to guys privately, they would share frustrations, but none of them turned on Josh. And I know that got me a lot of critics, and I'm fine. I don't care because my job isn't to, okay, the fans are frustrated. I'm going to tell them the locker room was. The point was, I was talking to guys off the record. I know what was being said to Mark Davis, and they hadn't turned on Josh. And so he gets fired, which I don't think anyone was shocked. His performance warranted it. Even though you could see what he wanted to do, and they had sold Mark Davis on where they were going, they simply just weren't getting it done. The shock is because so many assurances had been made that they were going to be around. Either way, Mark Davis did what I believe was the right thing. I remember years ago when Matt Millen fired Steve Mariucci at the Lions, and I was having lunch with Matt, and I said to him, he's a great friend, you did Mooch a favor. The crowd was ready to just turn on Mooch. And when Matt let him go, then as we know, they eventually turned on Matt and whatever. But the point was, I think that Davis did McDaniels a favor. Okay. He's got 4.5 years left, roughly $45 million. All the money left to Dave Ziegler. They get to walk away. The Raider fan, all that negativity's gone. People are excited. Just your thoughts, because you knew the behind the scenes that I was telling you. Your thoughts as the whole thing went down.
As the whole thing went down, I began to understand more what happened on that trip to Chicago. So that's the first thing that struck me was, okay, what happened before that, or in that trip to Chicago, was some of the guys were okay. They were all in. They accepted or supported the idea of Hoyer starting, but too many of them were not. And in the first half, you saw that clear as day. It got wobbly, shaky, and the performance was bad. And things kind of got worse from there. So what strikes me in my mind is that there were too many of the players who had changed their buy-in, not with Josh McDaniels necessarily, the person, but with whatever they were trying to do. Now, I understand the Chandler Jones. I understand Jacobs taking a while to get into form. I understand Garoppolo. But what we all understand is that there's like one head coach and some assistants. There's 53 game day players. So
Right.
you're not going to win with my way or the highway type thing as a head coach in the NFL, nor are you going to win if you lose enough of those guys focus, interest, and support. The owner in the NFL and pretty much anywhere, they can do whatever they want. It's their team. But to have an owner that's actually dialed in with players, which is not necessarily the case around the sport, that's a
No.
difference maker. So the owner's taking the temperature in the room, which he kind of has to do. When he realizes that a critical mass has gone overboard and is not coming back, because it's not coming back in the NFL. These things are one-way streets. I got their attention and focus. How long can I hold it, or what can we do with it? Uh, when that happens, I actually think the better move is to cut bait and start trying to turn it over as quick as you can. I think we're going to see the NFL more into a pump and dump mentality, pumping up, building up the team, trying to get them in position to win. You get into the season, when you're past the critical mass point or you're out of it, you start dumping. And we saw some teams do that, maybe one notably in the trade deadline. So my view of it is that the first thing that struck me was, okay, now I have a more of an understanding of what happened in Chicago and the number of guys maybe that weren't there
I
anymore.
want to I want to stop you right there because I do want to stop you before you go on to the next thought. The team was behind Brian starting in Chicago. The frustration came when the team wasn't doing anything, it wasn't scoring. Okay, why aren't we trying something else? Why aren't we going with Aiden? Then they come back to Detroit. Josh goes back to Jimmy, and everyone at this point is like, why? Why are we not going with Aiden? And then when Jimmy failed and they just would not go to Aiden, that's when the players
So,
begin to the anger, the frustration, you know, Devontae's anger on the sideline. And you can make an argument whether he's right or wrong. There are some people that say, listen, the guy's paid tens of millions of dollars. He doesn't need to be showing his frustration and showing up as coach. Okay. That's just one argument. I'm not saying I agree with it. That's an argument. Or the other one is no, I'm brought here to win. I want to win. Let's go. Let's win. Don't empower me, which Josh McDaniels did, and then try to take that power away. Let's go. And you may go remember, I asked Devontae a very pointed question when Derek Carr was benched. When I said, Devontae, if this leadership makes you assurances that they can get you a quarterback who can get you the football, do you want to stay? What did he say? Absolutely. And so when quarterbacks weren't doing that, let's make some changes. Let's go. And I know after Chicago, there was frustrations. Again, nobody was saying get rid of them privately. And John, you know me a long time. I've called for coaches to be fired, but I'm not going to report it if it's not accurate. But after Detroit, there was so much anger at why are we not making changes? Why are people still playing who can't play? That you knew, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to be now, because we had been told and that there were assurances given, okay, if they're not going to be fired, they're not going to be fired. So what are you going to do? And, the plan was I was going to ask on Monday, are you going to give up play calling? What are you going to do something different? I asked him afterwards in the press conference about it. And I mean, it was interesting to me. All right, now go on. So again, talk about
yeah,
what you learned.
Josh McDaniels might have been better to you hate to say take a cue from the college game, but listen, the quarterback position is changing. The quarterbacks are going to be more interchangeable many times. They need to be more interchangeable unless you have maybe a top 5 quarterback in the sport. What you're suggesting is there was frustration when the team wasn't clicking, obviously in Chicago early. Let's make a change then. It is not always necessarily the quarterback's fault, but where's the change? So then you have a repeat of that in Detroit, and it's got to be maddening as we saw. Um, I didn't put as much into the ball being thrown nearly into the stands by Garoppolo. I didn't know if that was a yip or if the ball slipped out of his hand, but there probably was more in everybody seeing the helmet be thrown down than not. And there probably was more in the feeling by enough guys on the team that they weren't turning over every single rock possible. It's got to be a scramble and a desperation to win. It's the most competitive sport in the country, maybe one of the most competitive businesses. And maybe there was a feeling there was too much of a hold on to like the way things used to be done. Not enough. What can we do now to put ourselves in the best position to win? It's not a point of desperation. It's not necessarily a point of innovation, but it's a point of urgency. If we look back at the McDaniels era, I don't know that we ever saw that much urgency, and I don't think there was a whole lot of a schematic advantage. Now, does that play out differently if Tom Brady or someone else is in the building? Maybe. We don't play ifs in the NFL. We play what did you do? Your identity is your record. A large part of it is your record. Identity is something the Raiders have to address with the next coaching change, and it looks like, at least temporarily, they've addressed it with the interim coach, who's got an identity pretty quickly.
I want to read you a text that I got. I got this Tuesday morning. Really Monday night, but Tuesday morning, from a starter. I don't want to tell you what I wrote him because you may be able to know who I'm talking about. But he answered my question. This is what he said. I don't know, Hondo. I love Josh, but like you say, the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. You're right. At what point do we change the process? Again, it's not a player that quit on him.
No.
It's a player just saying it's not working. In fact, a couple of players had told me, what do we do when the process isn't working? That's why I asked Josh that question. When the process isn't working, do you change it? I did that after the Bears game. Do you change it, stay the course, or whatever? Because several players had said to me, what do you do? I thought that was fascinating. And again, it goes back. It doesn't matter. It just goes back to they were in flux, and Josh's answer to everything. I'll give you another one. Do you remember a couple weeks ago I read a text from a player that talked about they were excited after a win for Josh? Remember me telling you that, okay? So this is what he said to me. He texts me that after a game. So they come back on Wednesday. This is what he said. I was excited for the win for Josh. It was good for him. I knew this had to be stressful. But damn, he's no different after a win or a loss. It's like this process is supposed to not be fun. We just come back every week and just play the same way, whether we won or lost. I don't get that. Again, not hating on Josh, just saying that he didn't get it. He didn't understand that, well, we're going to go back to the process, back to the process, back to the process. And I had another player tell me, man, I love Josh. I got no beef with him. That was his words. I got no beef with him. But he's like, we're supposed to have fun. This is supposed to be fun. It's if it's miserable, who cares how much money we're getting paid? I thought that was really, and that's a paraphrase. Obviously, I'm not reading that, but I just thought it was interesting. And in the end, I think Josh was his own worst weapon I'm not gonna now. There's a more I can say, but I said to the Brain Trust, "Okay, you married Jimmy. Well, what do you have to lose to say, okay, you know what? It didn't work. We're going with the rookie. Because if you lose every game, they're going to be excited you're going to get a Drake May or whomever." And it was process, the process, okay. And I thought that was brilliant. I want to get into another thing with you.
Well,
The last,
I do want to say something about the process. Let's roll back just so folks understand. The process starts in 1998, Dr. Lonnie Rosen and Nick Saban, and it kind of flows out from there. So Josh McDaniels is a grad assistant in 99. He's under the Belichick tree forever. It's not about fun necessarily with Saban or with Belichick. That works really well, arguably the best ever. What I'm hearing from the players through you is maybe it doesn't work as well in the 2020s and beyond. Maybe it doesn't work as well after events of a world, modern era, etc. So maybe Josh didn't explain the process well enough or recognize, hey, we have to make it fun. There are coaches that worked and were on that staff where the process began that made a point to say, we have to keep this fun. That we're at the college level. Maybe some more of that needs to come in. It did look like pretty fun at the end of the Bisaccia era when the Raiders, were doing pretty well. There was some fun there. So I can understand that contrast. I don't think that Josh maybe was aware of that. And also maybe the players didn't totally understand that the fundamental of the process is really having a hyper focus and trying not to be affected by the results. So there may be a lot more in that than we realize. And my guess is a whole lot more than Josh McDaniel realized, maybe not today or tomorrow, but when he's looking back in years to come.
I wrote a couple weeks ago about the difference between they loved Bisaccia, they like Josh. And there's a difference. And there's an absolute difference. And to Josh's credit, he was not the same guy that he was in Denver. He was much more open with his players. The meeting that they had last week was something that would not have happened in Denver and would not have happened in New England. In fact, one former New England player told me that anybody that thinks this is all the Patriot way has no clue, because that meeting would have never happened in New England. But at the end of the day, I think what did Josh in, I think there were a few things that did him in. Number one is the best coaches adapt their scheme to the talent that they have. And he was so rigidly committed to his system that I think it failed. Number one. The second thing is, I don't think the way he treated players was bad. I don't think that because I know what they've told me now. I'll tell you something off air. I'll tell you who was, and I'll actually show you something off air. Please remind me to do that. But I don't think it was how he treated players. I just think it was how he approached the game. And it's ultimately a game, and it was just business. Just business. And the hours that they put in are not like New England, but the hours and the grind, and these guys, a lot of them come from other teams. They know how other teams do it. They talk to other players. The NFL's connected now. I've learned one thing. Everybody knows how to slip into somebody else's DM, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm told that can be a negative thing. I don't mean it that way. Everybody talks. So I think that was the second thing, was that I think that it just was such a business that even though he was listening, I don't think he heard. And let me explain what I mean by that. Years ago, there was a coffee shop here in mid-Michigan that had a name for their coffee shop. And it was a great coffee shop. You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do.
Everybody loved it. And Everybody in Michigan loved this coffee shop. Well, that coffee shop ended up one day just changing their name out of the blue. And everyone's like, why are you changing their name? Well, come to find out, the name of their store was now remember, I'm already living in Nevada. And I found this out later because I told the story about my dog and someone shares this with me. The name of the store was a racial, they didn't know it, but was a racially insensitive term to people of Latino and Mexican heritage. And they adapted. Nobody held it against them when they found out. They just changed the name. And I think when sometimes though, when we only know things as one way, when we hear other things, it's not that we don't hear it. It's not that we don't process it. We don't understand it. And it's different. And I think ultimately that hurt him. I think a couple other things did too, but I don't it doesn't matter to go over it. I'm not going to run a bus over him, but overall, I just think it was interesting to watch. But let's move forward.
Well, I was going
Unless
to
you want to
say,
add some.
I do. Folks out there have probably seen it. The Saban and Belichick special. If you haven't seen it, the making of a coach or whatever it's called, go watch it again and tell me what you think the most important line of that show is. Because I think the most important line is maybe a lesson that Josh didn't get. Every single year, according to Belichick and echoed by Saban, your team is different. And your job as a coach is to basically put them in the best position to win, adapt. It's not to jam in your system every single time. That may be the most important lesson in an hour and a half lesson festival that everybody should watch who's interested in coaching or coaching anything. That may be the number one thing that Belichick says and Saban agrees with in that whole show is how every team is different and you have to figure out how to get the most out of that team. And you don't do it by being remarkably or overly rigid.
No, I'm going to add one thing. You and I have a unique relationship with Nick Saban and in our backgrounds, and I love Nick, love Terry, love their family, good people. And one thing that really stands out to me, John, is Nick wrote about this in his book. When he was at LSU, he had to change because it was okay, let's get a lead and sit on it. And if one thing, when Nick Saban was at LSU, he was not the greatest college coach of all time. He was certainly very good, but he isn't Nick Saban of today and all the titles he won at Alabama. And when he went back to Alabama, I remember talking to him. I remember the date, but I remember him and I talking about, you may have even been with me at one of the games, but I remember talking to him about how he's changed. And he learned, if I'm going to be great, every team can't be the same. We've seen Nick Saban run the spread and win. We've seen him run a 12, one back, two tight ends. We've seen him do a 22, two backs, two tight ends, five wide receivers. We've seen Nick win with everything because he understands my team evolved. Now, I'm not running a bus over here. You could see what Josh was trying to do. I tweeted that out on Monday night. Somebody goes, Hondo's deleting tweets. What an idiot. I don't delete my tweets. I'm accountable for what I say. You could see what he wanted to do. He just didn't have the personnel to do it. And I think that stubbornness was the biggest reason he's not the coach of the Raiders. And God bless him. He's going to walk away with tens of millions of dollars, and deservedly so. He signed the contract. He gets it. But I think that. All right, so I want to move on from here. Because they go get Antonio Pierce, who I had said before, one of the reasons I was told you don't make a fire of this course is because the offense is so complicated. You can't really have a coordinator run it. That was the thinking in the building. That's why I reported it. But They go get Antonio Pierce. He says to Mick Lombardi, peace out. Mick Lombardi's out. They bring Bo Hardigree up, who was a quarterback at the University of Tennessee. He's been a coach a long time, not a coordinator in the NFL, but he's been around a long time. I expect to see a lot more bubble screens. I expect to see more screens, more slants, more attack down the field to set up the run, a lot of play action. I don't know that I would use the term simplifying the offense, but certainly getting rid of a lot of the complexities that they didn't have the personnel to run and run what they have. I think this was a brilliant move by Antonio Pierce. I supported 110%. I think it was a great move by him. I think he has done something Josh didn't do. Remember, I told you they loved Rich Bisaccia. They liked Josh McDaniels. Antonio's always been very popular on the team. He's a rah, go get him, Rich Bisaccia, Pete Carroll type disciple. Not saying he played, but I mean similarity. He makes a big move to get a guy to make the offense something that they can work with that defense. I think this is a great move for the Raiders. I am not a fan, but I root for good people. I want Antonio Pierce to get this job. I want Champ Kelly to get it. I want Mark Davis to be able to get the success. I want them to be able to get the success. I think this was a brilliant move with him and Champ Kelly. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. Antonio Pierce, I think he's part of that Desert Swarm defense. Is kind of what they always called it at Arizona when he was in college. He breaks in under Herm Edwards really as a coach at Arizona State. Not a good fit for college at best. Out of college he goes, arrives to the Raiders. Super unique because he played not long ago. And what you're saying, what I understand you're saying right there is you like the moves he made, is he may have an actual idea of, okay, here's what I think we can do. And here's how we get ourselves in position to call the games to do that. There's some value in that, of course, if it works. There's some value in it with progress. The bar is low right now. If Raider fans see progress, see, hey, we're doing some things we can do, they're going to be all for it. I would say simplifying is better. I think in theory, you want to have as simple a game plan and as simple an attack and simple an offense as you can execute. Now, does that mean you do the simplest thing and just hand it up the middle for dive? No. But what can we actually handle? And then how do we get from there to there? I am impressed that Pierce went ahead and made the move right away. It sounds like he was given the keys, basically. Okay, you're going to be the interim head coach. Said, okay, if I'm going to do this, here's what I want to do. And maybe explain to ownership and to leadership, here's why we're going to do it. And forward we go. So the idea of bringing a guy in popular, I think, is a good one. There's a Raider history of having guys that have played in the past be leading the team. What kind of inspiration are we going to see? Well, it sounds like initially, and this is what you want when you make a change like this, you want people to rally around them and try to step forward, try to take a step up, really try to turn the screws a little bit. And Pierce should be absolutely straight and credible with them. He played for a while at the NFL level. He knows what he's talking about. If somebody wants to come out and dog it or semi-mail it in the rest of the year, he's going to get on him. He's going to tell him. He's going to move him down the list. I don't know what kind of head coach Antonio Pierce will be, but he's not going to have the remarkable tunnel vision of some of the coordinators. Mm-hmm. And I get the impression, looking at his playing career and his resume of coaching, where he knows enough to know what he's doing, but not so much that he's going to be set and locked in, that I do think it's going to be interesting to watch for sure.
I got some interesting tips from players that I'm going to talk about in Sunday's podcast before the game. Some things he did today that I think were fascinating. I can't talk about them now, but I'm going to talk about them on Sunday. I want to go back to something, Irvin, Magic Johnson to most people, those of us that have known him for a long time, back before he was Magic, he was Irvin. Irvin talked about it's very difficult to be a head coach because he expected everyone to have his commitment. And that's why Urban didn't last long as a head coach, because guys weren't willing to come late, show up early. I mean, come early, leave late. It was very hard for him. Pierce was that guy, very hard worker, very dedicated. And I'm wondering, and I'm going to ask Antonio about this on Monday. I wanted to give him a little time. I'm going to tell him what Irvin told me, that was the hard part of coaching, is adjusting to not everybody has your work ethic. And I'm going to be fascinated to ask him about that. I think that's going to be a great question I'm looking forward to. All right.
Yeah.
I want to switch directions here, John. The trade deadline. I thought Seattle way paid for Williams, giving up a second and a fifth for a guy that had a big salary, but has not been a big performer. They just way overpaid. They got fleeced. And then I saw a Montez Sweat and a Chase Young, two guys that I would have either one. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I know Montez very well. Matter of fact, I even texted him. I wanted him to be a Raider. But two guys there that I think you could have got for relatively cheap if you're the Raiders, and with an ability to be part of the plan across from Max Crosby. They didn't do much. Obviously, we know other things were going on Tuesday, but I know that there was some interest in the Raiders in Montez Sweat and Chase. Montez more, but I know there was interest in both. Obviously, things transpired on the trade deadline that didn't come about, but I thought Washington, okay, we're probably going to lose these guys, so let's get something. I thought Seattle way overpaid. What'd you think of the trade deadline?
The end of the Young Sweat defense, as I call it, with a twist, with Chase Young going to San Francisco. Probably not a bad place to try to rehabilitate your career, lining up on the other side of a familiar face and a dominant face in Nick Bosa. Interesting. I think what you look at Washington, you see the change is coming, baby. They change the team name, change the leadership, change the coach. It's all coming. It was surprising to see what the Bears did, but they did maybe what the Raiders would have considered doing, which is sounds like they're going to lock Montez Sweat up. So when you look at it on paper, like, why are you getting these guys for a couple weeks? They could just go back to Washington if they want. We've seen that in other sports. Well, maybe there's already a move to be made with Sweat. But that's an interesting thing because when healthy, that was pretty spectacular. I actually like what the Eagles did. I think they did not. I think they got better getting Bayard from Tennessee. And I actually like what the Vikings did. I don't know if it's going to matter much, but Josh Dobbs is ready to play because he's been playing. He's an ultra smart guy. Seems like a perfect fit. He's going to go up to Minnesota. He's already in form, in shape. Yeah. He's going to learn some things from Kirk Cousins, who's obviously going to be helping while he's sidelined. I actually thought the Vikings probably did about as well as they could have going to get Josh Dobbs and maybe any other quarterback they had to look at.
Yeah, I thought San Francisco, the Eagles, the Bears, and the Vikings won it, in my opinion. I thought they had the best of the NFL trade deadline. I think New York did too, the Giants. I think Seattle got fleeced. All right. I want to get into one other one, actually two other things. I want to talk about what's going on at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh. I did a podcast early this morning with my part 2 of the top 10 candidates. Jim Harbaugh is in a lot of trouble at Michigan. Now, you can debate, and I think it's a fair debate, whether this is really that big of a deal. Because in high school football, you can send people to the game to scout. In pro football, you can. Now, I have said on the record in TV in Detroit, so I'm not going to come back to Vegas and pretend that I didn't say it. Until evidence is offered, to me, this is a nothing burger. Okay? But if the evidence that I'm hearing, and I'm hearing it from people who are not Michigan haters. Now, some of them are big Michigan people that hate Jim Harbaugh. But if what I'm hearing is correct, that there's overwhelming evidence of this. The issue is it's a rule that everybody agrees to play by. Jim chooses, I'm not going to play by it. That's his choice. But it's hard to be the leaders and best if all evidence is true and he deserves to be innocent till proven guilty. It's hard to call yourself the leaders and best then if you're going to go out and just blatantly wanton do whatever you want. Now, I am hearing from inside the NFL that they kept Jim Tressel out because the NFL has a vested interest in protecting the NCAA. It is their farm system and they don't pay a dime for it. So they don't want issues with the NCAA. And I am hearing from people I trust within the NFL that if Jim Harbaugh tries to make the jump, the NFL is going to do what they did with Jim Tressel and just push back. My question for you, is this a nothing burger? Do you think it's something big? Now, listen, if evidence is proven, then I think it becomes big. But we know on Thursday there was a Big Ten coaches meeting with the commissioner or with people with the league. And I talked to somebody very familiar with the call that told me the overwhelming consensus of the coaches is you got to jump in. Now, you may say, of course they are. They can't beat them. That's fair. Unless he's beating you with an unfair advantage. What's your thoughts on this whole thing?
This is unprecedented for one massive reason. This is happening in real time, and it's threatening and disrupting the competitive integrity of the Big Ten right now, 2023. So there is an emergency situation that has to be evaluated immediately. My guess is it's already been evaluated much further than we know, and that there is clear and convincing evidence that a significant rule was broken. I actually couldn't really care what Harbaugh knew, what he should have known, did he know or not. I don't think this is for the Big Ten and the NFL. I would hope to support it. They got to address the competitive integrity immediately. If the competitive integrity has been compromised by illegal scouting with pretty clear and convincing evidence, like you said, overwhelming, I'd say it's got to be clear and convincing. They got to throw out these games immediately and not vacate them. They need to be forfeited. Now, that probably goes through the present day. And the reason that would be assuming that the guy on the sideline at the Central Michigan at Michigan State game was who we think he was. That means probably even that Michigan State game is forfeited. Have they done any advanced scouting of such for the opponents they have the rest of the year? You got to do the same thing. The difference with this and so many other things is this is now happening in real time. That's why Big Ten coaches and coaches that have played Michigan are probably flipping over tables. That's why athletic directors are saying, listen, you want to run this league, you're going to have to run it. And that's really why this is such a hot issue. Now, later on, in the winter and the spring, you can figure out who knew what, when, why, where, should they have known. And the NFL can essentially quietly collude to not hire Harbaugh again. I believe Jim Harbaugh had a 2-year effort to try to get hired in the NFL and was rejected pretty royally and maybe in a couple cases kind of embarrassingly. Now, every single owner is going to stop the brakes and they're saying, what in the world is going on here? The NFL is a small world. The owners are focused. They got a million things to do, but there's not anybody in sport that is unaware of this right now. This is possibly the biggest scandal on field affecting competitive play in the history of college football because it could be stretched out so far. This is not the Rose Bowl getting fixed between Iowa and UCLA by a guy that had an issue with gambling. This is not other stuff that maybe we don't know. This is potentially over 3 seasons. But the issue is one that's hot. It needs to be addressed immediately, like tomorrow. If there's clear it's got to be addressed immediately.
I'm going to share something with you because you're an attorney as well as a journalist. But I was talking to somebody very familiar, not Michigan State, because everyone will say, oh, that's just a Michigan State thing, who told me yesterday. I said, well, what do you think was going to happen? Now, this is a person with Michigan ties. I thought that was worth it. This is a person that's a Wolverine fan. This is a person directly connected to Michigan who said to me, I think every game where it's suspected or can be proven that cheating was involved, they immediately need to forfeit. They need to forfeit last year's Big Ten title if it happened in the Big Ten. Forfeit every game this year. If there's any games moving forward, they need to be forfeited. He needs to be fired immediately. This is a Michigan person. He needs to be fired immediately. Now, I want to repeat, until you show me evidence, this is a nothing burger. But there are enough people that I know who are aware of the evidence that are telling me, don't worry.
Yeah.
It will be.
Well, here's the thing, and you make a fair point. For you and I to make a judgment, we need to see evidence. We understand that people that are going to make decisions on this have evidence, and what I'm saying is they have it, they need to act. The other thing about this kind of crime or this kind of issue is this is what I would call a strict liability crime. It doesn't matter who knew or what they knew or whatever. If it happens on your watch, you're not going to survive it, and these games have to be forfeited. The competitive integrity of 3 different seasons, you understand, folks? You're talking about more than 1,000 student athletes, more than 1,000 players played against Michigan each year. How the hell do you think they would be okay with this? Oh, it's no big deal. No big deal? Are you serious? It's a huge deal. So,
well, how about this one? How about this one, John? This person from who's connected to the University of Michigan said to me, he couldn't beat Ohio State till he cheated. So now, how do we say he did beat Ohio State? I mean, I'm telling you, there is a huge, vast swath of Michigan fan. It doesn't matter what he does. They support him. That's fine. That's what fans are.
Yeah.
I don't care. I know Michigan. I know Michigan State fans that used to tell me back in the day, I love Tom Izzo, but I don't care. He won't cheat. It's time for us to cheat. Everybody. So let's not pretend like there is not a segment of every fan base that wouldn't defend their team for doing this. I want to be clear.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about people that have to administer the game. If you have that responsibility, if you're the president of Iowa, if you're the president of Rutgers, if you're the Big Ten commissioner, this is a humongous threat to everything you do. You have to protect the competitive integrity first. And for the coaches to have to kick the guy in the tail, for the athletic directors to have to shake the presidents and wake them up out of slumber, I don't think they realize the urgency of this. I am surprised that we're talking today that Michigan is going to play this weekend, and as of now, Harbaugh is going to be coaching. I would have bet you there's no way he's coaching again. This has got to be addressed immediately. And if there is not clear and convincing evidence of anything being wrong, this is such an unprecedented situation. They're going to have to say, hey, we looked into all this. Turns out this is not what it looks like. Otherwise, if the rule has been violated, I don't care what school it is. This has got to go. What the hell are you doing? There's 1,000 kids on the other teams that they're going to play for 3 different years. What possible world is this okay? As a commissioner, can you decipher right from wrong? And can you do something about it? Yes. It's a wild story. It is really wild. And I understand people can maybe be overzealous and almost be too good for their own good. That's fine. Players play, coaches coach, people that run the sport have to run it. And this is surprising that it's honestly taking this long to get somewhere. I would not be surprised if we have a different conversation next week.
Fascinating. I do agree with you. Lastly, Bobby Knight has passed.
Yes.
And I love Bobby Knight. I realize he's an old school coach whose ways would not work today. I get that. I understand it. But I've always had such incredible respect for him. He was always so kind to me, very kind, very warm. I remember my first time I asked him a question, and I asked him a question, and he looked at me and goes, "What's your name?" And I said, "Hondo Carpenter." He said, "After Havlicek or the John Wayne movie?" And I said, "The John Wayne movie." He says, "I should have known." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Because no matter which one you're named after, you had smart parents. Great movie, great player, great question." And so when I would see him after that, he'd always say, "How you doing, John Wayne?" Or, you got another great question for, or I'd ask him one and he'd say, and I literally remember him walking into a press conference once saying, "No, no, 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 no. Hondo asked us the first." I mean, he's just always very kind to me, very personable. I liked him. I always called him Coach Knight or Mr. Knight. I remember him one time, he said to me, we were standing around and I called him Mr. Knight. And he goes, "Why do you do that?" And I said, "Well, you're my elder." And I remember I was a lot younger and I just the way I was raised. And I remember someone in the media mocking me for doing it. He goes, "You call me Bobby." I said, "Yes, sir." And I mean, I understand. I'm not signing off on everything he did. I'm not signing off on all of it. But basketball lost a legend. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have known about the great Pete Newell. By the way, do you know where he coached? One of the places he coached, John?
Yes.
Where?
Michigan State, San Francisco,
You're
right?
darn right. Yeah. And I wouldn't have known about him if it weren't for Bobby Knight. Um, I believe my approach in media was formed a lot with him, understanding the value of relationships. He didn't like hot take people, but unlike his reputation, he didn't mind tough questions. If it was a smart question, he didn't have a problem with it. It's when it was personable or somebody trying to make a hot take or somebody trying to get his goat that didn't go with him. Again, I don't like everything Bobby did, but he was an icon. He was a legend. And I am, when I think back to him, I'm very grateful that even though it wasn't a little bit of my career was influenced by him. And athletics lost a legend, and basketball for sure. Your thoughts on Bobby Knight?
It's quite a football influence on Bob Knight. And it actually comes from Vince Lombardi. A lot of people know the story of Mickey Cochran. Mickey Cochran goes to school where Vince Lombardi is a teacher and coach. Mickey Cochran teaches Bill Parcells. Parcells is an assistant for Knight at the Army. Mickey Cochran is involved, and that philosophy begins to be forged. Extraordinary commonality and fascinating insight under the coaching tree of Bill Parcells and Bob Knight. Mike Krzyzewski's right under there too. So there's actually a lot larger football influence and Vince Lombardi influence in Bob Knight's coaching methods and Coach K's as well, which I talk about in my show and which we talked about before, than most people realize. So it is fascinating that a lot of what he did actually trickles down from Vince Lombardi and, crossed over to two sports. That's very unique. Always also entertaining to watch him try to play golf for those that have seen that on the YouTube. That is time as well. Oh, you're going to want to see it. Are we going to pick the four?
Let's do it. Hey, I'm doing pretty good on our weekly pick fours, by the way.
You're doing pretty good. My job is to pick the four most interesting games. I feel like we're delivering for the people. It's going to get easier as the year goes on. I know, but we've done some good ones so far that you otherwise weren't going to watch. We are going to start with the grass game. Let's see. How exciting is it for Miami and Kansas City to play? Real exciting. How exciting is it for them to play at 6:30 in the morning Pacific time on hybrid grass in Germany? I don't know, but they're going to do it. Let's see what happens with the grass. Miami and Kansas City.
I'm rolling KC all the way. I just believe in them. I really like Miami. but I'm going to Kansas City.
Yeah, they had a bad week. I think that they're going to probably bounce back as well. Although Miami already, Miami went over there real early. We'll see how that goes. Without any question, there are two great games. We're going to get to those, but I really like the Seattle at Baltimore game. Both teams going along well, already thinking playoff positioning. This is one of those weird ones where it's an early start for a West Coast team. We've seen that trip some college teams up before. It should not make a difference to the pro team, but the Seahawks going into a traditionally difficult home environment in Baltimore.
This is going to be a spanking. I'm a big believer in Baltimore. I love Lamar Jackson, always have. They finally got him weapons. This is going to be a butt whipping on Seattle.
So you are buying that the Ravens are on a rise, taking off a little bit. I don't know about the butt whipping, but
Listen, I think John Harbaugh is the best coach of the two brothers.
Yeah,
I'm a
he's
big,
tremendous.
big fan of John. And unlike Jim, John gets along with everybody. People love him. Yeah, it's a whole different. I'm a buyer in Baltimore.
Buffalo at Cincinnati is interesting. Early in the year, I got Buffalo in the Super Bowl. Like a lot of folks, I am afraid that Buffalo has lost too many guys to injuries. They cannot replace them this year. We also talked about, I thought it was going to be an off year for Cincinnati. It certainly started off, but now you're starting to see the wheels turning. Who goes which direction? This is Buffalo at Cincinnati.
Who day? Who
We
day?
all happen. Yeah, we all
I
know
am as you know, their middle linebacker, Chris Bocci, is a great friend of mine. I love Chris. I'm a big fan of Joe Burrow. I'm not a fan of the ownership. Now, remember, that's my personal opinion. That's not the opinion of any of my friends on the team or part of the organization. Make sure that's clear. But I'm riding with Houday. I'm riding with the Bengals.
This one is interesting. We talked earlier about coaches needing to adapt. Sean McDermott has to adapt when his lineup is being changed the way it has been on all sides of the ball. I think Cincinnati's hot right now. I'm going to ride with Cincinnati too. But let's see if we watch that game again later this year. And then you've got the obvious one. Show me, Dallas. Are you going to show me? Show us, Dallas. You want it? Come in. Dallas at Philadelphia. This is the one where I think it's going to be a convincing big time knockout. The Eagles are going to be jacked and they are going to deliver the wood to the Cowboys.
I think the Cowboys are in for a butt whooping. I just think there's way too much Eagles and not enough. There's an old saying in Texas, all hat, no cattle. Dallas is a lot of hat. Eagles bringing a lot of cattle.
Eagles to me seem like the best team, the most likely team right now to win the Super Bowl. They seem to me to have the best roster. It is remarkable how stocked their roster was, especially when you consider the massive hit they took with Carson Wentz. But as we sit here today with new Super Bowl odds halfway through the season, I think the Eagles are probably the team to beat as we sit here today.
Agree. All right, John, give me a score and a winner. The Raiders. New look, new inspiration at home, hosting the New York G-Men. What say you?
The Giants feel like they are like ready. The straw breaking the camel's back. It's not going well for Brian Daboll. He's throwing down Microsoft Surfaces. I think he's going to be shopping for a new quarterback. I actually like the Raiders in this one, 20-17.
I tell you, we got one more person who has to make a pick, and then I put them all, as you know, in the final article. But everybody so far has picked the Raiders. I think that's pretty interesting. All right. From Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast, part of the Fans First Sports Network. I'm Hondo Carpenter. He's John Shop, also part of the Fans First Sports Network. You can check out his Spartan Pride podcast. Thanks for joining us. Man, it's already Friday. Tomorrow's the weekend, and bam, we're right back with some football. Can't wait to watch some Raiders football. Johnny, thanks for joining us, brother.
All right.
God bless you, everybody.